I'm going to begin with a couple of pieces of our readings today. From our psalm, we hear, "The Lord is gracious and full of compassion, slow to anger and of great kindness." And from our reading from Jonah, Jonah says to God, "That is why I fled to Tarshish at the beginning, for I knew that you are a gracious God and merciful, slow to anger and abounding in steadfast love, and ready to relent from punishing." I think Jonah is such a funny book. Jonah is told to save the Ninevites, but he doesn't like them, and he doesn't really want to save them. So when he's told to go to Nineveh, he runs the other way, to Tarshish. But God doesn't let him get away, and Nineveh is saved despite Jonah's lack of enthusiasm for the endeavor. And I think, who of us, when we know we should go one way, hasn't run in the other direction? We know we need to have that hard conversation, or offer that olive branch, or help in that area of injustice. And instead, we run, we avoid, we distract ourselves with shows or games or Facebook. God says to go to Nineveh, and we, like Jonah, say, no, we don't really like the Ninevites. There's bad blood there. This is too hard. I don't know how to do this. I really don't want to save them. Let them reap what they have sown. Let their own past catch up with them, and let God punish them. I have other things to do. I hear these words from our lessons today, and I am brought back to my time in seminary. And I have a distinct memory of being in class where the instructor wanted to talk about the justice of God, and without much thought, I blurted out, "I don't want a just God. I want a merciful God. And if we get what we deserve," I thought and think, "we're all in trouble." There's lots of talk these days about justice, about fairness. We do want the world to be as just as possible, as fair as possible. And I found this list of ways to show justice, written for school children and written towards school children. But I think they apply to all of us. We take turns. 2, we tell the truth. 3, play by the rules. 4, think about how your actions will affect others. 5, listen to people with an open mind. 6, don't blame others for your mistakes. 7, don't take advantage of other people. And 8, don't play favorites. And these are great guidelines. I love the idea of a world operating on these principles. And yet, what if these are in conflict with each other? What if the rules that we are playing by are taking advantage of others? What if we're always first or always last due to things that we can't control? What if our actions affect people in ways we can't begin to imagine or know? How can we ever, in this complicated, connected, constantly changing world, be completely just? How do we do the work, the things that God wants us to do? How do we accomplish this? Jesus tells us that the kingdom of heaven, the way things should be and will be, is like this odd landowner that hires people throughout the day, whenever and wherever he can find them. Come and work. No need to stand idle. And at the end of the day, it is time for everyone to get paid. And the last ones hired get paid first. That already seems a little odd. And they get paid the normal day's wage. Then those hired in the afternoon, and so on until the first ones hired are to be paid. Now, it doesn't seem just that those barely worked got the same amount as those who had toiled all day. That just doesn't seem just. And I am sure if I had been in that early bird group, I would have been hoping and expecting some sort of bonus. I had seen what the others got paid. Those ones that worked for just an hour, those ones that worked from mid-afternoon. And now you're paying me the same thing? How is that fair? My inner child screams out. I want it to be fair. And we always like to think of ourselves as being a part of that first group hired. When you called God, I joined in. Many of us were baptized as infants. We have never known a life apart from God. We like to think of ourselves as those first laborers, and we hear this story as a warning against being angry at God's generosity towards those who come later to the fields. And that it is. That is in this story. But let's be honest. None of us are the laborers who arrived when first called and dutifully worked the whole time. None of us. We are all the ones who have come late. We are all the ones napping at the side of the field and chatting with our neighbors while leaning on our hoe, idly standing in the market and confused as to what to do next. We show up at the last hour for the work God has given us to do over and over again. When I think of the Christian community, the churches throughout the world, I think we are not really a well-oiled machine. We're not really a highly trained group of service members. We're not a line of dedicated field workers working in an organized and focused way. We are not that. We don't agree with each other on what needs to be done, and most days we can't even agree with ourselves about priorities. And this pandemic has not made that any easier. What is the way of justice? We see things that clearly aren't just, and there are a million ways to solve it, and we freeze up or work in different directions to try and solve it. People with selfish goals and desires justify awful actions and try to keep them hidden from view. And each one of us has so much that we are carrying and working on in our own little fields all the time. So let's be honest. I've met precious few that showed up at God's field first thing and worked throughout the day. And by few, I mean none. There's always some breaks in there. We are human people. We are imperfect and weak and selfish. We are an explosion of cats, not some well-oiled machine. Scurrying about and difficult to direct, we catch glimpses of the work and we may attend to it for a bit, but then we're captured by the sight of a butterfly passing by, and off we go, chasing it through the sky. And the work remains unattended by us often and consistently. This world and how things happen and what is going on can make me so angry and so discouraged. People are selfish and mean and inconsiderate and evil. And yet, we do hear that call to labor in God's fields over and over, and we do see parts of the world in our lives that need to change, and we make the changes. We do show up. The world is a better place because of us, because of the wisdom and directions that God has given us and still gives us. And these things that we share with one another and co-create with people around us. Because of the times when we are able to put that hoe in the ground and help in God's fields, the world is better. Plus, I'm not actually convinced God wants us to be a well-oiled machine. We were not created as robots or puppets. We are created as these creative, distractible, diverse people. There is a richness in our complexity that is delicious, even as it complicates things. I believe God delights when we chase those butterflies and talk to our neighbors and rest in the shade. When we find the joy and wonder in all God's works, and we aren't just toiling in the fields, God rejoices. And at the end of the day, we all receive the full wages. The full wages. We all receive grace upon grace. We all receive the benefits of the nature of God. The nature of God, gracious and full of compassion, slow to anger and of great kindness. And in that gift, we can be that to others. We can be compassionate, slow to anger, and kind, even as others are their imperfect human self. We are human people. We are beloved, forgiven, and called by God. And we get mercy. And in that mercy, we find the truest justice. Thanks